basically, we were talking about JJ. JJ's incoming rankings as a player was 25th. And his draft position was 10th. So, Dennis tried to do this kind of formula where, hey, their incoming rankings, compare it with a draft position. Was there an improvement? And I'll just kind of verbalize it. So JJ's was modest. He went from being, quote unquote, the 25th best incoming player to number 10 in draft position. Still amazing that he was able to do that. Okay. But then you have somebody like Mike Sanistril, who went from his incoming ranking was 589. This is Dennis Bistian's number. He got a draft position of 50, which was an improvement of 539 slots, if you look at it that way. Michigan had two players in the top 100 in the incoming rankings, and those were J.J. McCarthy, Junior Colson. And, they ended up getting 7 in the top 100 in terms of draft position. So just kind of a way to look at is Michigan sort of raising players up from their incoming rankings versus, where they ended up getting drafted. Is it apples to apples? Well, maybe the bar of being drafted is even higher because you're not just competing with, players that came in to school at the same time. You're competing with different levels of players who might be seniors or graduate students, as well as juniors and seniors, right? So, if you kind of look at it that way, Chris Jenkins would be another one. His incoming ranking was 502, and his draft position was 49. So I will do a deeper dive into this, but I just wanted to kind of point out that actually 5 players kind of jumped kind of out of nowhere in that kind of that nebulous, large 3-star-ish kind of category into being drafted. So what does it mean to be drafted? Ladarius Henderson, Michael Barrett, they got drafted very late. Are they going to make the team, so to speak? I don't know how to judge. To me, it's a success if you get drafted, right? So, and these players were not even in the top 400 players coming in. So a couple other examples would be, this kind of sparked the idea of we could maybe do this analysis for Michigan, for Ohio State, for some other schools as well. I thought Dennis was onto something. He sort of verbalized it in a recent podcast, and I started looking into the numbers, and it is kind of dramatic. All of these players that got drafted did go up from where they were in terms of incoming rankings.
That's interesting. So it's such a simple comparison. I'm sorry I didn't think of it because it's so obvious, but that's never crossed my mind, and I've never heard of anyone doing that. And it seems fairly legit, not completely. There are flaws to it, but that's a pretty legit comparison. So that was the 2021 recruiting class?
Well, okay, so this is just players that got drafted this year.
Oh, and where they were in their year, regardless of the year.
So versus where they were when they came in. Now, in terms of the 2022 class, and I'll make a separate video on this so that there's more content. but what I'll say is that the 22 class had Will Johnson, Zeke Berry, Derek Moore, Keon Sabb. Those were the ones that were in the top 100. Will Johnson, arguably, I don't even say arguably, he's probably going to be, if he doesn't get injured, going to be an All-American. Zeke Berry, probably a question mark starter. Let me just put it that way. Derek Moore, starter. Keon Sabb is a starter, but not for Michigan. He's a starter for Alabama. That class also had Tyler Morris, Mason Graham. Tyler Morris was 104 ranked according to 24/7. Mason Graham 209. So then you have another starter, another Mason Graham, All-American question mark. I'll just put that there. Then you've got Colston Loveland, who is not ranked, or in this ranking, he was not ranked. I think there's probably some official ranking somewhere. Kenneth Grant, Jaden Denegal, Alex Orji, all of those players were not ranked in the, in top couple hundred. But they're going to be starters. Colston Loveland, Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, all of those three could be All-Americans. I think it's reasonable to think, arguably, I think I mentioned this on one of your morning shows, that arguably I think Michigan might have 4 players that could get drafted in the first round. They only had one, JJ, in 2024, but in 2025 they might have 4. So, I thought this class seemed like, that 2022 class seemed like huge production out of it, and players coming out of nowhere to be, really maybe even the best in their position. All those names that I just described. I don't know what you think, TJ, on that.
Yeah, no, that class, without question, is a foundation for the success we had. I mean, Mason Graham as a freshman defensive tackle had an impact. That is so rare. Another player from that class who I think is going to have a big year this year is Marlon Klein. So, I mean, I think you can actually look at that class and say that was the class that helped take it over the top to make us a national champion. I think that's actually a good point. I've never analyzed that. I haven't looked at that class like that till just now. And you're right. I mean, when you look at the classes that led up to the first Big Ten title, the second, and then obviously our third national title, the 2022 class, which made everybody sophomores this past season. I mean, the impact. I mean, that's why, most rivals or even most fan bases who may not pay attention to Michigan are like, oh, they just had 13 guys drafted. They're not returning any talent. The COVID year's eligibility is over. Michigan's going to fall flat on their face. Well, like you pointed out, and I believe, I don't know if it was Pro Football Focus, but there's some media outlet that does the top 50 players for next year's draft, and Michigan has 4 of them. Ohio State has 6 of them, by the way. But Michigan's still one of the top teams with the highest level of talent for this upcoming season for the draft. So I just think, the 22 class is obviously, you could argue, a cornerstone class. And I would argue the JJ class is another cornerstone class because that had a lot of impact players. But I wanted to actually touch on Ferris. I don't know if you've seen this because you're not on Twitter, but there's actually a chart going around on Twitter. It's by an account called College Football Data, and they have a chart with team recruiting and NFL draft from 2017 to 2000 or until 21. It's actually a pretty interesting chart. I'll send that to you. Mm-hmm. But I think that actually hits on the analysis you're looking for in terms of where classes ranked versus where they're drafted. It's a pretty interesting chart. I could send it to you now, Mark, if you wanted to pull it up. I could link it to your Twitter.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of points to this idea that Michigan can also find. I mean, there is development, so we can pat ourselves on the back for, hey, we're developing players, but maybe some of this is how players are ranked. They're missing something. Michigan is getting something, finding some secret sauce that other programs are not seeing in some of these players. Like how does Kenneth Grant and Colston Loveland not even crack the top 200? Right. How does that happen? So
yeah. Well, I'll tell you exactly how. So for example, Colston Loveland, the reason why he went so under the radar is because, one, he's from Idaho, and there's a lot of flaws with the ranking. See, I have a lot of issues with 247's ranking process, and I know they actually have a high hit rate. If you look at what's drafted versus their rankings, it's actually pretty high and it's respectable. But a lot of issues I have with their ranking system is, one, if kids are not local to where, a lot of these kids get ranked at the Under Armour events or the Nike events or the Adidas camps, right? And if these kids do not participate in those camps, they don't get ranked. So we had a tight end by the name of last class. He's highly ranked. I can't remember his name right now. But he had a passing in his family, and he really didn't want to do any of the classes and or any of the camps. Brady Prescorn. So if anyone knows who Brady Prescorn is, he's a incredibly talented tight end who will be an impact player at some point. So, he was going through some family stuff and he shut down his recruitment. He committed to Michigan in March. He went from a borderline 5-star player and he fell all the way to, let's see, 225. And let me just tell you, if you watch his highlight tape, it wasn't the play on the field that, when you don't go to camps, you don't get rated. And then when you don't get rated, you drop. So Kenneth Grant, for example, a lot of the 3-tech and 0-tech players, they don't get ranked as highly in the 247 system because they go the way the recruiting services work is they base your ranking on your likelihood of being drafted. So players like running backs or your defensive tackles, your interior defensive linemen, or your guards, they don't get ranked as highly in the rankings, whether they're extremely talented or not, because they're not projecting them to get drafted above a 3rd round grade or whatever, or even like 5th round. So that's my issue with the ranking system. I think they should, in my opinion, this is a pet peeve of mine. I'm kind of going down a road here. They should rank these players based on college projection, not NFL projection, but they do it based on NFL projection.
And I agree with you, TJ, for this one simple reason. Their audience are college football fans who care about the recruiting rankings based on what they project the championship pursuit to look like. They are looking at the recruiting rankings thinking this is how good my team's going to be based on these recruiting rankings. And that's what they care about, not who gets drafted and how high.
Right. I mean, how many times you see a player who thrives in college? Maybe he's undersized, whatever. But when he gets to the NFL, he's not, he obviously doesn't translate. But like when you look at him as a high school prospect, that kid will kill it like a Mike Sanders still. He will crush it at a college level. Right now, thankfully he was able to build his stock and he was drafted high. But there's tons of players who are undersized and they get looked down on because they're not an NFL prospect. But in college, they kill it. Now, we've actually seen a transition in the NFL where smaller quarterbacks are starting to get drafted, like your Kyler Murrays or your Bryce Youngs. But that used to be looked down upon,
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with that in regards to them projecting the college productivity and not they're not playing to their audience. So doesn't make a
and
lot of sense
that's
to me.
is it that Michigan is finding these players, or is it that the ranking services are off, or is it that Michigan is developing these players? It'd be interesting to really kind of figure out which of those are the biggest factor.
Well, I mean, for one, I mean, we know for a fact development matters, and Michigan has one of the best developmental programs in the game. But I do know Michigan took an NFL approach to scouting high school prospects. Harbaugh built his scouting department to identify talent like you would in an NFL draft, finding like undercover, like diamonds in the rough, if you will. And Michigan, even to this day, even if anyone's paying attention to recruiting now, they're very particular in the players they extend scholarships to. So I think, and I'll tell you this too. Kenneth Grant, for example, Michigan didn't know what they had until he got in fall camp. When he got in fall camp, that's when Harbaugh made the comment. It was a gift from the gods, along with Mason Graham. So, sometimes you don't necessarily know how a player is going to translate until you see him in person. But Michigan has always been ahead of the curve on identifying talent, diamonds in the rough, and then developing them. And we're going to find out if Michigan can sustain that development under Justin Truss.
Yeah, and then there's the strength and conditioning piece too.
Right.
That that Michigan was doing it differently than everyone else with respect to strength and conditioning. And again, we'll see how that's different because Harbaugh is literally rewriting strength and conditioning at the pro level, where the conventional wisdom is these players, they make millions of dollars. They just work out on their own. They're not going to listen to some Marine captain, strength and conditioning coach.
Right.
like they would at Michigan, right? So,
Right. So if we look at this chart, Mark, I kind of feel like, or Ferris, I kind of feel like this is maybe not exactly what you were looking for, but I think it gives you an idea of draft rankings. You can click on the picture, Mark. It would probably expand. But you can get an idea of class ranking, right? And then you have the number of players drafted, and it shows, and you can probably explain it better than I can, Ferris, because you're the math guy, but
yeah, so you get the average recruiting versus the number of draft picks. Now, I do hear Ohio State fans saying, well, does a 6th-round pick count or a 5th-round pick count? Don't they have to make the team? That sort of thing. Michigan did do a great job in terms of quantity in 2024. I believe that there'll be quality, yeah, meaning higher draft picks in 2025. I mean, in 2024, how many first? I think it was first 3-round draft picks were 7. So it was both quantity and quality. But
I personally can't imagine any Ohio State fan making that claim. I don't think that happens.
well, does it count? Does it count that a player gets picked in the last round and that adds to the Michigan's total?
well, does Tom Brady count?
Yeah, good point.
I just know that after I saw what was the disparity between 2017, I don't know what was magical about 2017, but anyway, 2017 in this current draft, that Michigan had 3 or 4 more players drafted than Ohio State. And so I had that pushed in my, if it was just somewhere on Twitter, that's fine. But people felt obligated to push that in my direction and tag me on that over and over and over and over. So I took it upon myself to count 1st-round draft selections during that same time frame, and that was a different number.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
well, but again, like Ohio State really thrives on skill positions, and skill positions do get drafted higher. But I would also argue, like, Ohio State is, I think we will all agree, it is wide receiver U, and wide receivers do get drafted typically along with quarterbacks the highest. Now, I guess I'll make a counter argument against Michigan. Offensive linemen get drafted pretty high, and Michigan does not produce a lot of 1st-round offensive linemen. They just don't. And I don't know fully why that is. I mean, Zach Zenner, if he didn't break his leg, I don't think would have been a 1st-round offensive lineman, but I do think he would have went in the 2nd. Yeah, I mean, but I think Michigan, for example, they'd rather. I mean, don't get me wrong. Of course, you want 1st-round talent, but I think Michigan's happy with getting the 2nd-round to 7th-round guy because you're still getting that range of 30 to 250 best player in the country, right? You're still like, even if you're drafted in the 7th round, you're still one of the top 260 players in the world, and you're playing on a college football team, like whatever, whether they make the team or not, to be determined. But there's a lot of graphs or a lot of charts right now by Pro Football Focus where Michigan is leading in a lot of categories of most position players in the NFL, like tight end, offensive line. I think defensive line was on there. There's a few position categories where Michigan is leading the NFL right now. And you can credit those 5th-round picks.
Yeah, one other note is maybe you get an extra year out of them. Maybe you get an extra 2 years out of them. I think right. Some Ohio State fans that I interact with will say maybe you get another 6 years out of them is what they would say. Maybe they are still thinking that Michigan won the championship with 5th and 6th year players, but so. Every team had them, but I don't think Michigan was that different than any other team with respect to that. So,
all right, folks, we appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football. Of course, follow TJ's work at Ronin Sports Talk, and also Ferris Khan's got some other videos headed our way. Correct, Ferris?
Yes. We'll cover both topics: that the incoming rankings versus draft position and the 2022 class. Some analysis of that as well.
TJ, anything you want people to know about what you've got going on?
No, I mean, just follow me on Twitter. Sometimes I'll put some recruiting takes on there, or if I get some intel that can't wait for the show on Tuesday. But nope, I'll be here. Me and John will be back next week. I'm sure Ferris will be around as well. And until next time.